Kristen Gillibrand. Now, I want to preface by saying there's an inherent difference between commanding respect and demanding respect. If you command respect inherently, you never have to explicitly demand that someone give it to you. And that's really critical because Gillibrand was particularly inconsistent in the way that she delivered different messages throughout her time on the stage. And there were times when she did really effectively command respect, and there were other times when she didn't and or had to actually demand it, and when she demanded it, frankly, she lost it. So here's a couple of big swings for her. Her big highlight moment, her big strength, was when she was discussing reproductive rights. She was the most consistently authoritative, well-developed in her discussion points about compromises made behind closed doors and how legislation gets done, who she's had to fight to protect women's reproductive rights, and then she brought it home with this great imagine statement. And any marketer will tell you the word imagine is a great way to get people to see themselves in your shoes and to connect with them. And she did that, saying that to imagine, and she's saying this, she looked straight in the camera and said, to all the women and the men who love them, imagine that when we beat President Trump, when Mitch McConnell walks into the Oval Office to negotiate, I believe she actually said, God forbid, and the door closes, who do you want sitting behind that desk to fight for women's rights? And then she reiterated her track record of advocacy. Like, that was a real powerhouse moment where she just owned it. And the content was great. The delivery was great. She was completely in alignment, verbally, vocally, and visually. The second time was with regard to immigration. And she said, and I'll quote, she was great about really driving home the point and drawing the listener's attention to what was most important. She said that the fact that 7 children have died in his custody, the fact that dozens of children have been separated from their parents, and they have no plan to reunite them. This is really very passionate and very specific and very directed, very focused, very authoritative. That was a great beginning to the point. But then she went into her plan and the steps that she wanted to take, and she suddenly went into what I call mental list mode and using what's known as upspeak. And upspeak is that pattern where it sounds like you're asking lots of questions with your voice, even when you're not. As soon as she started to list out her plan for how to change these problems in the way we're handling immigration, she shifted right into upspeak. It was like she was asking a litany of questions instead of emphasizing what she truly believed needed to happen. So, and again, I'm going to read this and I'm going to use my finger to go with my voice to show where she rose. So she said, first, I would fight for comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. Second, I would reform how we treat asylum seekers at the border. I would have a community-based treatment center where you're doing it within the communities, where asylum seekers are given lawyers, where there's real immigration judges, not employees of the Attorney General, but appointed for life, and to have a community-based system. I would fund border security. You seeing where I'm going with this? Now, this is problematic on a couple of levels. First, on a completely subjective, subconscious level, it's annoying after a while, and whereas there are some people who won't mind it, others, frankly, will, and they'll tune her out and turn her off. But it also sounds, more importantly, it sounds insecure. It's like she's suddenly begging for validation, like she's not quite as confident. She's confident in what she stated in her analysis of what has happened, but she's not confident in her projection of what she will do, or if she's certain whether or not you'll like it. It's because when you ask all those question tones in your statements, it's like you're saying, okay, right, at which point you're implicitly begging for validation over and over again. She just undermined all her own authority because it doesn't sound like she's even really convinced in what she's saying. And if she is not convinced, why would we be? So then the irony is that as soon as she finished that list, she shifted right back into that authoritative, aligned mode again, because she said, But the worst thing President Trump has done is he has diverted the funds away from cross-border terrorism, cross-border security, and he's given that money to the for-profit prisons. I would not be spending money in for-profit prisons to lock up children and asylum seekers. Now, can you hear the difference in how she intoned and inflected and emphasized one chunk of speech from the other? The beginning and the end chunks were great. The middle just lost all credibility, all authority in the middle of it. So as far as any other weaknesses were concerned, again, she had no real sound bites. I mean, I just quoted a ton of what she just said. I still couldn't summarize it. I need those takeaway points. Again, in previous examples, some places she really commanded respect, but where she demanded it and it just was really weak. At one point, Bennett tried to interrupt her in a question that was posed to her, and she turned right around to him and snapped, "It's my turn." And the irony is, to me, that's what I heard in my head was my 3-year-old, who now is in exactly that mood. It's my turn, it's my turn, it's my turn. And I thought, oh, you cannot sound like my 3-year-old and run for president. That's not a good thing. So by her initial need to demand respect, she instantly lost mine for that moment. Also vocally, when she goes into upspeak, she can start to sound shrill, especially with the energy behind it. It kind of forces the voice to sound more like this. And men in particular are going to latch onto that as reasons not to like her. So she's going to want to be careful not to let that control her. Otherwise, it can be one of those borderline deciding factors that make people say, well, I don't want to listen to that for 4 years, which is also one of the challenges that Hillary had. Visually, she's attractive, which helps. But in some ways, she kind of looks a little bit like Hillary. So if she starts to sound like Hillary in some of the not great ways, and she looks a little bit like Hillary, people are going to leap to the opportunity. Opponents are going to leap to the opportunity to use that against her. Not necessarily opponents who are on the stage, but just people who don't like her. She also oddly blinks a lot as she's talking. So it's one of those things where you don't notice it until you notice it, and then you can't not notice it. So she may want to get that under control.